welcome to the show. This is Mind, the podcast for love, life, and learning, where your mind matters. I'm your host, Nate Shear, and we'll be discussing SERE. I'm sure a lot of people don't know what it is, don't quite know what it is, or have a lot of confusion. So this will be a really fun and good episode. So I have two wonderful people here today. We're going to start with the who, what, why. So we'll start with Micah. Who are you? What do you do? And why are you here?
What's up, guys? My name is Micah Gillette. I was a SERE specialist for 12 years in the Air Force. I did my first 6 active duty, then I switched over to a reserve unit in Florida. Did that for 3 years, and then as a SERE specialist, started training as a combat aviation advisor. Did that up until the beginning of last year, and then made my exit out of the Air Force.
Awesome. Good stuff. Over to you, Stephen.
Hey, yeah, I'm Stephen Drakes. I've been a SERE guy for about 15 years now. Did the majority of that time active duty, and then like Micah, I jumped ship, joined the bright side, and I'm a AGR SERE guy out in Langley, Virginia right now, and I've been doing that for about 4 years, loving life. So I'm a winter class, so I'm also class of 0902, so the last hard class, just to make sure we're all setting the the standard now. But yeah, excited to be here.
Awesome. I'm sure we'll get into. Oh,
I was a summer class, so if we're putting that on the table, it was an easy class, for sure.
So for anyone listening, we'll probably get into it later, but the class is held up in the Pacific Northwest, and it gets pretty snowy during the winter. So I'd like to get to know both you guys a little bit and have the listeners get in touch with you and understand you in a short amount of time. So I use this icebreaker. How do you use your time? What's one app you're using, one book you recommend, and one thing you're either listening or watching to? It's a 3-part question. We'll start with Stephen.
How do I use my time? Obviously, I love to work out when I can. Try to hit the gym at least 5 times a week. Maybe it's not the gym every day, but it's running here and there. But in terms of what I'm watching and listening to, I don't watch a lot. I got 4 kids running around and I'm pretty busy. But in my meantime, I do listen and enjoy audiobooks. And if I was going to suggest an audiobook, it's not military related or leadership related or any of that. It's just pure enjoyment. Anything from Brandon Sanderson. So The Way of Kings or the Mistborn series. It's a bit of fantasy and whatnot. It's a little bit out there, but it's a great world building and you can get lost in it pretty quick. So
awesome. Over to you, Micah.
So similar to Stephen, I'm trying to stay in the gym and stay active, whether it's through out walking with my dog or I train a little bit of jiu-jitsu. So I do that 3 to 4 times a week and just trying to stay busy, keep my body moving. Apps I recommend there's one called Libby, and it is, basically gives, for where we're at anyways, gives you free access to any library books that are in the local library for digital books. And you can also get them a bunch of audiobooks for free too. So if you don't want to pay for Audible, it's a good way to hopefully get some free books. Sorry, my kid just walked in. As far as what I recommend, right now I'm actually in the middle of a podcast series by Andrew Huberman. So I'm kind of haven't been into books in the last last 2 weeks. I'm listening just, health as far as body and mind goes on the Huberman podcast. Books I'd recommend. My degree's in economics, so I'm always interested in economic stuff. And I think one of my favorite books as far as just basic understanding and knowledge and personal growth development is probably Rich Dad Poor Dad for finances.
Awesome. That's some good stuff. What belt are you holding?
Oh, white belt. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. That is burning a lot of calories rolling around the mat. That's for sure.
It is. It's best because you get to do it with a bunch of guys sweating on each other. So it's the best kind of exercise.
It's wonderful. So we're going to move on. I'd like to hear your favorite SERE story. What do you got?
I'll
start with one, I guess. Favorite SERE story that I can tell on this podcast, caveat. I was probably a new troop or new-ish troop carrying my own crews up at Fairchild. This would have been 12, 13 years ago. And I had a flight nurse because they just closed down the Brooks Survival School, which is where all the flight docs and flight nurses used to go through their SERE school. They closed that down. They ship them up to Fairchild, say, no, you have to go through the regular survival school like everybody else. And I had a student, and bless her heart, 50-ish years old, going through SERE school in the middle of the summer. And as much snow as in the winter, there's mountains to be climbed in the summer. And, we forced our students to climb some mountains, that's for sure. And we get about halfway up this hill, and she kind of just like falls down on her pack. And I'm slightly concerned, like, hey, are you okay? And she just starts going like, ow, ow. And every like 3 seconds, she, another ow. I'm like, what's going on? She's like, I'm being stung by bees. And I'm like, well, then you need to move. She goes, I'm not moving. And she just sat there, and like for the next like 30 seconds, I just am standing at the top of this hill contemplating, like, do I go down there and get stung by bees and drag her up this hill? Do I motivate her to get herself up this hill? And eventually it took me and a few of the students to grab her and move her away from, this bee's nest that was just constantly getting after her. But it was just one of those, I'll always look back and just laugh at those moments. So
That's awesome. She was too tired to even move. That's
Yes.
rough.
Oh yeah.
What do you got, Micah?
So I had one that was a little darker, but that one actually reminded me of a really funny one. So I'll go with the funny one. A similar story of a student getting stung by bees. We were out, keeping students up past dark was pretty commonplace, and it was rare to have people go to bed before it was dark out. So at night, people are out getting boughs from trees, setting up their shelter and building the insulation bed and stuff. And I'm hanging out around the fire, watching the students get their stuff finalized. I'm finalizing all my notes for the night before we go to bed and take off. And one of the guys in the group starts running around and yelling and slapping his legs, and can't really figure out what's going on. I get a little concerned, go up, ask him what's going on, and he's basically starting to get stung by bees, but it's cold and it's dark, so it doesn't really make sense. But I shined my light on the back of his boot, and he had stood on a ground hive, and then they had crawled up his boot. So his whole boot was covered in about 100 bees, and then they were up in his pants. So then I just told him, like, take your pants off. Like, there's no other solution here other than taking your pants off, or just wait it out. They'll eventually get bored of stinging you, I guess. But I think he got stung like 26 times, all in his inner legs and crotch.
Oh, that's a rough night.
Yeah.
People don't realize there's such a thing as ground bees. So the bees in the Pacific Northwest, they make burrows in the ground. And so, it's just something, it's a bit of a culture shock to some.
Note to self, I'll have to keep that in mind.
When it's cold, they're not real active, so they won't come out, flying crazy, but they'll crawl. And I think they crawled, and then as they warmed up from his body heat, started getting mad.
Oh, that's rough. So I'm curious, this podcast is focused on mental health and mental fitness and continuously working on ourselves and our mind. And hopefully we get to a point where we're able to work on our mind the same way we work on our body, because both of you mentioned, going to the gym and things like that. So what do you guys have for a tip, a trick, or a personal story to take care of your own personal mental health? What do you got, Micah?
I really believe that body, mind, soul is all kind of tied into one. If I'm not doing well physically, I'm actually like a little bit under the weather right now, and today's just been a rough day. So I really think kind of taking care of everything, and having a purpose. So not only taking care of your body, but like, why am I waking up today? What am I going to go out and do today? If your only answer is work, then, that's, I don't know. I don't think that's a great answer. I think you should kind of have something that you're striving for, or trying to develop or work on. And it could be anything. It could be family, it could be education. If you own your own business and you're trying to start a big business, or it could be work. But yeah.
That's awesome. It reminds me, I saw this thing on, I think it was Benjamin Franklin. He had a notebook and a journal they found later on, and he only had two things written on every journal page. And it started with, what will I work on today? And then at the end of the day, it said, what did I accomplish? And so I think that's something that's always good. Like, did I work on it? Did I get a little bit better? Did I not accomplish it? And then why did I not accomplish it? Did I get sidetracked, and maybe I need to work on not getting sidetracked the next day? But those two simple questions are super, super powerful. But Stephen, what do you have for tip or trick?
I don't know if it's a tip or trick, but I like to perceive. It's a saying. It's be tolerant with others, but be strict with yourself. So I guess that's just kind of how working with people, working with airmen across, the Air Force, whether it's officers enlisted, they're within my shop, or I'm working with an agency that's outside my shop. If I kind of approach that relationship that way, I tend to get favorable results, and it makes my life way less stressful if I'm getting favorable results. So
That makes sense. Okay, now we're going to move into the interview. These should be some pretty easy questions. Since Stephen was in last, I'll ask him, what's the AFSC and what's the official title?
AFSC is a 1T0X1. So that's a SERE specialist, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape specialist.
Perfect. Question for both of you. We'll move over to Micah. How did you find it or be interested in the field?
So when I initially signed up, I wanted to be GI Joe. It was just, I was 19 years old, shooting guns, jumping out of planes. I was like, that sounds like the best. I went to the Army and the Marine recruiter because that's where GI Joe comes from, right? Army Marines. Told my mom about it. She was not happy. We were in the middle of Iraq, Afghanistan. This was 2009 that I went and talked to the recruiter. So she didn't like that idea. So then my brother was already in the Navy, and I couldn't do the same thing as my brother. So that led me into the Air Force recruiter's office. Went and talked to him, kind of told him what I wanted to do. He told me about this really cool thing called pararescue. So I went and started training for that. I signed up for it, did all the evaluations for it, and then went and kind of had a heart-to-heart with a guy who was currently a PJ. And he's like, gave me, I guess, just the real talk of like, this is what your life is going to look like if you choose to continue down this path, and laid out what it looks like as far as their schedule goes, which is rigorous to say the least. And I just wasn't interested in it. I wasn't interested in the deployment schedule. I wasn't interested in the stress that came along with being in a job where people actively are trying to shoot you, regularly on deployments and that kind of stuff. So I went back to my recruiter at that point and was like, hey, okay, what else is there that I can do all the fun stuff and not get shot? And then he played the SERE recruiting video, which had dudes scuba diving and jumping out of planes and shooting guns. I was like, sign me up. Let's do it. Sounds fun.
That's
And that was
awesome.
it.
Stephen?
Yeah, no, same. I mean, relatively the same. I went down, I was going to do the pararescue thing. And then a little bit into that, I was like, prefer not to be drowned on a regular basis. That was really what it was for me. I can't swim as well as I thought I could. And then I walked over, talked to the SERE guys, and the SERE guys were like, yeah, let's do this. And here I am 15 years later. So
Awesome.
Nice.
Okay, Micah, can you provide a brief overview of the AFSC?
Of SERE?
Yeah, tough, right?
Yeah, so I would say
good
real
luck.
briefly, I mean, our job at its core is to be experts in survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, and then pass that knowledge on to those who might need it. So if anyone anywhere in the world gets isolated, how are they going to get all the way back home, and kind of teaching them that process?
Awesome. Stephen, what would you say are the primary responsibilities and objectives? Kind of the same thing.
Yeah, I think it really depends on who your customer is. Obviously, we have a very broad Air Force with different mission sets. A C-17 crew is going to need different SERE training than an F-22 pilot versus a PJ unit versus a SERE guy attached to a JSOC unit, So SERE is a very broad career field. There are lots of niches and lots of green door assignments that get you down certain paths to do certain things. But generally speaking, we are the insurance policy that the Air Force is selling, operators, whether that's air crew or guys on the ground. We need to be able to provide that, whether it's the training, we're preparing their ISO preps, evasion plans of action. or we're in a deployed location, actually supporting the C2, the command and control function of a personal recovery network. So working in an AOC somewhere, helping plug rescue forces to the IP themselves or the isolated person themselves.
Makes sense. Micah, we kind of touched on the responsibilities and objectives. What would you say is the main challenges?
That's really dependent on where you're at. I mean, getting students to listen is probably the biggest challenge. If you're actively trying to teach someone and like, hey, these things are important, whether it's from teaching basic, SV80, which is combat survival up in Washington, to know your isoprep information. What did you put down? What's on your EPA, and getting them to take that stuff seriously. I would say, it's just one of the biggest kind of routine challenges. But being that, as Stephen said, it's kind of a broad career field, it can really change based off of where you're at. Whether you're in a specialized assignment, you could be a test parachutist, and all you're doing is jumping all the time. You could be teaching free fall or a free fall instructor. You could be teaching at a dive school, or you could be teaching air crew and getting them prepped up and ready to go. So that's really depends on where you're at.
Yeah, some of the questions are really tough. I got one for you, Stephen. Again, this might go down different avenues and whatnot, but can you give us an overview of kind of what training and education looks like?
From like the very beginning,
Yeah, just
like
kind of a
fresh out of
foundation if somebody was going to come into it. What does the beginning
yeah.
look like?
So the beginning, I'm not honestly, I'm not super spun up on how the new AvSpec war process and onboarding looks like from a basic training to selection to SV80. But 15 years ago, and as for the majority of my career, the way it's looked has been you graduate basic training, you go to selection, which is down at I think they call it stock now, SERE specialist orientation course. The cadre there determine whether or not you are a good fit to be a SERE specialist potentially. And what that involves in is everything from, physical fitness. They assess your ability to speak in front of others. There's a psych evaluation that's done, along with a bunch of other things. But from there, they go up to Fairchild, and then at Fairchild, they have a pre-team course. I'm not quite familiar what the actual course number is, but there's about 3 to 4 months of preparatory training that gets done to kind of help build some of those foundational skills. Because again, there might be airmen out there that are interested, or civilians out there that are interested in becoming a SERE guy or a SERE gal that have never worn snowshoes, who have never swung an axe, and those are all really, potentially dangerous skills, but also things that the better you are at when you step into the actual course, the better you're going to make it through there. And then the actual tech school, so SV81, which is the SERE specialist training, and that's about a 6-month course. We run 2 a year, one in January, it ends in June, and then one that starts in July that ends in December. After that, I mean, you're going to spend a good portion of your time at Fairchild in the beginning. That's slightly changing, so that might look different in the next couple of years. But as of now, you're probably going to spend a few years at Fairchild, getting your 3 level and 5 level, and then you're going to, from there, flush out to the force at operational support squadrons, rescue squadrons, special tactics squadrons, or various other assignments where you'll get further follow-on training to obtain your 7 level.
Okay, that was a very thorough rundown. Thank you.
Yeah.
Micah, what would you say is the most important personality trait someone needs, or personality traits, like could be,
To become a SERE specialist or in life?
to make it through SERE? You can mention life too.
Yeah, I think just mental and physical flexibility. And when I say physical, I don't mean like you can touch your toes, but the
Yoga.
ability to adapt and change kind of on the fly. The whole intent is to understand a survival situation and be able to excel in that, and no two are ever going to look the same. So if I am in one location, I might have these resources and be able to do these things with it. If I'm somewhere else, whether I have different tools or just different resources available to me. So kind of having that flexibility that, hey, food and water are still important. I still have to find these things. I would say that was probably one of the most important to getting through the training itself. As far as once you're in the force, I think it probably shifted a little bit more to self-drive and self-dedication. we're largely unsupervised in SERE, and I don't mean like we don't have a commander, but my deployment, I did, in 2019, I did a 5-month deployment, and I was by myself for almost all of it. I
You're
mean,
saying the quiet part out loud, Micah. Shh. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Got to be real on this one.
Yeah.
I went and I would meet with people, but I was kind of, autonomously working. So making sure that you have the drive to actually to work, because you're not going to be supervised.
That makes sense. Stephen, since you taught a bunch of classes, well, Micah did as well, but was there anything that kind of surprised you where you thought someone would not succeed and they completely, blew you away or anything? Going back to like the personality traits, they seem like they wouldn't get it and maybe they did really well.
You mean as a SEER guy or SEER
As,
gal?
yeah, instructor.
Yeah, as an instructor there. Yeah, I think it really depends on where you're at in life. Micah mentioned flexibility, mental and physical flexibility. When you get head down in that tunnel vision and training where you can only focus on one task and the next task and the next task and the next task without taking a step back and seeing the bigger picture, you get some students who get through team, they show up to the field flights to teach survival school, and they're so tunnel vision, they're so goal saturated or task saturated and so focused on what's coming next that they can't relax and take a step back and actually evaluate, hey, my students, I need to make sure my students have food, they have water. I need to make sure that their feet are still dry. I know I need to teach a fire lesson coming up, but I need to make sure that their personal and safety needs are being taken care of before that happens. And I mean, I'm not going to name names, but there's been multiple individuals I met early on in their field flight days where, we had to retrain them almost to kind of understand that, like, yes, obviously you're a great survival specialist or a SEER specialist, but I need you to be a survival instructor right now. And part of that instructing is being able to take care of your crew because they're the ones that are relying on you out there in the environment.
Awesome. Micah, before teaching classes and after teaching classes or groups, I don't know what they're called. Maybe I'm butchering this, but was there something you learned being an instructor that you never thought you'd learn teaching people? What surprised you the most about people? That they don't listen?
No. Man, that's a good question. I want to give a good answer, but I feel like I also want to think on it a little bit. I don't know. You got anything off the top of your head, Stephen, for that one?
Yeah, I would go resilient. My initial reaction, young, and I mean, obviously it's relative to where I am now, but young, senior airman, I worked at resistance training, which is the a very unique position as a SEER specialist. We're out there doing certain training and applying certain pressures to certain people, but we got to see those students in the beginning when they weren't trained, and then we do all this training, we spend some time with them, we show them some things, and all of a sudden you see what that end product looks like, and they come back within a week and they're kicking our butts. And I was like, that's awesome. Like, that was one of the most rewarding pieces of or one of my more rewarding times as a SEER specialist at Fairchild. But it actually just went to show like how resilient some of our members actually are, to be able to be very, put in a position where they're not feeling great, and then to be able to turn that, flip it around on its head, and walk out with their chin held high.
That's awesome. You got anything, Micah? I feel bad that you're sick.
No, you're good, man. No, I mean, I think that kind of hit the nail on the head, and that's where I was leaning. I just never worked at the resistance portion of training, so I don't think I saw it that directly. If anyone has SEER school coming up, the cadence, at least it was for the last, I don't know, decade or so, they might have changed it recently. The first 4 or 5 days you're going to be on base doing training on base, and then you'll go out to the woods with an instructor, and you have the same instructor for that 11-day period. That's how it was when I was down there instructing and teaching SV80. When you get back from the woods, then you go and work with the resistance instructors, and the cadence with them is just a little bit different. So I kind of had them, for 11 days straight. So I think that those small changes you just don't see quite as dramatically. versus seeing someone, having them go train for a week and then having them come back to you and seeing them again. But yeah, just the resilience piece I probably saw more directly in the pool. I worked at water survival after I taught SV80, and we would have people who couldn't swim a lap. They were literally not swimming, and then by the end of the day, quite literally, they were escaping out of an underwater mock-up fuselage for a helicopter and making it to the side of the pool. It wasn't pretty, but they did it. They finished the school. But.
You got out there.
That's all
That's
that
the
counts.
important part.
Yep.
So Stephen, I have kind of an impossible question, but I have to ask it on the show, try to get a understanding to our listeners. Could you attempt to kind of walk us through what a day, week, month looks like if there was an average? I'm sure that's not a thing, but if you met someone in an elevator and you needed to like give SERE what a day looks like in, 3 minutes or less, what would it look like?
3 minutes or less, huh? All right. It depends on where you're at. I know we keep saying that. It's situationally dependent. That's a term every SERE guy likes to throw out there. But I would say this. If you're working at an OSS is going to have you working a block training schedule. Typically, you'll have an annual schedule pushed out by your weapons and tactics office, OSK shop, and they're going to say, I need, these many, maybe once a month I'm going to do CST, once a month I'm going to do water survival, and maybe a couple times a month I'm going to teach, these courses here and there. So those days are already blocked out. You're teaching. The other days outside of that, though, you're doing what we call personal recovery operational support. So PR op support is what it is. And I can only encapsulate this as I take a look, and I'll use my unit now as an example. It's an F-22 unit. So I have all of the necessary read-ins and, clearances to be able to mission plan with my F-22 fighter pilots. And I know where they're going to be and how they're going to fight in a conflict. And then I do some mission analysis and risk mitigation. And I sit there and I go, what's the most likely and the most deadly scenario that they're going to end up as an isolated person? Based off of where they're going to be at and how they're going to fight. I then take that, distill it down, and then I can develop training plans based off of that. So if I know that my pilots are going to go do X, Y, and Z, it's going to put them at risk of maybe, let's just say, an urban environment, more so than a rural environment. Then that means I'm going to tailor that combat survival training to an urban environment training setting. And so the other days of the month, I'm prepping maybe for the training event itself. I'm meeting with maybe local law enforcement that are going to help and assist. We do that here locally. We reach out to the local sheriff's department, and they put out a bolo on certain individuals that are dressed in a jumpsuit looking color, certain jumpsuit, and then they're actually involved in the training. But a lot of that requires time, that requires connections, relationship building. So that's at an OSS level. I'm sure I've already busted my 3 minutes, but like at an RQS, a rescue squadron, which is somewhere I was also assigned, that mission is completely different and not at all the same. And I would need another 5 minutes to describe what an average day there would look like. So, but for an OSS, I'll give you that. That's your average OSS, or should be at least.
Perfect. That's a great rundown. Yeah, it's always a difficult question. Micah, if you have to pick, hands down, what's your favorite aspect of the job?
I think probably the opportunities that it presented throughout my career, doing 12 years in, there was always something cool or exciting that was on the table or available to do it. I mean, the teaching is super rewarding and being able to provide the information to people, but we got some really unique experiences. I'm sure Stephen could probably talk to that. He's been in a little longer and he's still in, so he's probably done a little bit more than I have, but yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll try to get into deployments and some other stuff later on, but I'm going to try to keep it as real as we can. So, Stephen, I got to ask you, what are the less desirable things? Got to highlight the whole picture for the people.
Yeah, I think some of the less desirable things, at least that I've experienced, is advocacy. I obviously care a lot about what it is that I do, and I care about, the pilots that I'm training. But sometimes other people don't care, and that advocacy from leadership is it's a struggle sometimes getting after that. That's more of a Yeah, I don't know. That's probably seeking that, advocacy from leadership is sometimes frustrating when it's obvious to me. It's frustrating to have to communicate why the things that I'm doing are important to others sometimes.
And it seems like it should be obvious.
Yeah, it isn't always.
Micah, what would you say sets this AFSC apart from all others?
When I went and talked to the recruiter and he put in the video, he's like, yeah, this is a job where you're like, go camping or something. And that, while it, it is obviously not what the job is. The job's a lot more than that. It's still probably one of the only ones where we regularly get the opportunity to go out and do camping and do stuff on the ground, other than some of the really high speed jobs where they're out living in the field all the time. But I think just the opportunity, and I could be wrong here, but I would say the opportunity that we're provided from such a young point in our career field. It was at one point my understanding that you had to be considered an official DoD instructor. You had to be at least a NCO, so E5. I believe, and again, correct me if I'm wrong if one of you guys know otherwise, but I believe SERE is the only one that allows E3s to be official instructors. So as an E3, we didn't have troops under us, but my responsibility as an E3 was to take a group of 6 to 8 people out in the woods, and not only teach them about 70 pages of curriculum, but then teach them, keep them alive, make sure that they're healthy. So it was a lot of instruction and a lot of obviously rigorous work and keeping them alive and stuff like that. So kind of that opportunity that you're given as a really young airman was unique.
That's awesome. Yeah, it reminds me of a story. I love stories. Hopefully, it's not too long, but I remember working in the tower and we had a person visiting from another country and he came up and didn't speak English, so he had a translator and he comes up into the tower cab and he's looking over everything and he just busts out laughing. And we're like trying to figure out what's going on, but we have to wait for the translator to, translate. And so we're kind of just stuck. And then he finally translates everything and he said, I can't believe you'd let your enlisted control traffic. So in every other country in the world, an officer can only tell another officer what to do. And so I always thought that was such a cool and powerful thing. We have, young people controlling traffic, aerial refueling, these things where if something messes up, an aircraft goes down, people die, millions of dollars. And so it's cool that we entrust and give that responsibility to someone that's like 18, 19 years old, like right out the gate, obviously with the proper training and whatnot, but it makes me pretty proud to be part of this Air Force. But I did want to give it over to you, Stephen. Could you highlight some of the unique opportunities, if it's travel or working at the White House, or are there like specific slots or things out there for SERE? I think we've touched on some of them, but are there more, some pretty cool, unique opportunities out there?
I mean, yeah, I think Micah kind of hit it on the head a little bit when he was talking about just from an early age, a lot of exposure to things that maybe not other AFSCs have the opportunity to be exposed to. But like, I'm a free fall guy. I jump free fall. I went to Halo. I'm a static line jump master. I'm a static line jumper. I've been to Thailand, Korea, Australia, the Philippines, Iraq, Qatar, Afghanistan. And I mean, the list kind of goes on there. We get to do a lot. If you're hungry for the work, there's work out there for SERE specialists, and you can go see. I mean, I know it sounds corny, but I've got to see the world, and I'm extremely grateful for the opportunities I've had. But I've worked very hard to get them and be where I am today. But if you want them, there's definitely lots of things you can do as a SERE guy or gal.
Sounds a little different than camping. So do you have to maintain all those certs and everything? Do you keep
Yeah,
jumping?
yeah. So I do. We still jump. I jump down at Suffolk, DZ right now. Well, yeah, not right now, obviously, but that's where me and was Justin Bender a classmate of yours, Micah?
He was just before me, but he was in my flight. He was
Just
in Bravo
before
flight. Yeah.
Yeah. So me and Justin, we jumped down there at Suffolk.
Nice.
So yeah.
So I have a measly 33 jumps. I got my A license.
There you
Um,
go.
Nice.
so, Micah, I'd like to ask, I mean, you kind of touched on it, but I'd like to hear a little bit more from you on common misconceptions. You said it's camping, but can you touch on like what you'd say is the greatest common misconception?
Well, I think one of the biggest misconceptions actually comes from people who are going to SERE school and going to SV80. And it specifically has to do with them going to, like, the resistance portion of the training, but even the field portion of the training. There's just a lot of stories that get a lot bigger than they actually are. I think people come away from it and they want to. I don't know. I don't know why they tell the stories they do, but I've heard a lot of wild stories about things that have happened to people at SERE school. One of the ones, and this individual actually ended up getting kicked out of her career field, but she got back. She was having some hip issues, and then she went to her commander and told her commander that that she had dislocated her hip in the field, and 2 SERE specialists held her down and put her hip back in. And Justin Bender actually might have been one of the people involved in that alleged hip reinsertion. By the way, Stephen, you got to ask him about it.
I will.
But obviously stuff like that is not happening. We're not doing that kind of stuff. We have medics out in the field. We have all the appropriate IDMTs that are trained to come out and do all the medical stuff they need to do. So I think that's probably one of the biggest misnomers, is that, people get these stories that, oh, they broke my foot and made me walk on it, or just crazy stuff that these people come away with. And I, teach their own, I guess. But as far as the career field itself, I don't know that there's a whole lot, at least nothing that comes to mind, within the career field as far as like what we do.
Even from the outside, though, I think that's, what I'm most interested in. Like when people hear SERE, like what have you heard people think you do? I mean, does it go back to that camping? Like, oh, you just camp.
Bug eater. Yeah, bug eater is
Oh
probably
yeah,
one of the
I would
most
think
common
so. I
ones.
think especially when you talk like in a joint environment, the Air Force is the only service that actually dedicates an entire career
Hmm.
field, or MOS, to SERE. So in the Army and the Marines and the Navy, it's a special duty assignment. And so working with our joint partners, sit there and be like, wait, you're SERE? So what's your actual job? And you're like, no. I've done this my entire career, and this is all I've done. And I think that's been enlightening. I think that might be a common misconception, that this is just something we do on the side, like an additional duty, and we have like some other thing that we're doing on a day-to-day basis.
So, Stephen, have you ever been in a meeting or something and someone, signed you up for something or spoke on your behalf and you're like, I don't even do that? Or
Uh,
is everyone pretty
Again,
aware?
back to what Micah said, is we don't have a lot of oversight sometimes, and so I wouldn't be found in a meeting where somebody was telling me I was going to do something that I wouldn't have been there for, or I wouldn't have been
I,
qualified to do.
I have a good one for that, actually, if you want to hear it.
Oh, absolutely.
So I got to my reserve unit, and my new commander, he actually just came in right after me and took command of the unit I was in. It was the 919 Sauce, and he was talking to me about other options to try and do SERE training, refresher training at a discounted price, because I was standing up a brand new SERE program. There was nothing that existed beforehand. So I was like, I'm willing to try and work a little bit, but we need money for this program. It's the nature of the beast. The program requires money. And he told me, he wanted to try and do an executive level SERE program, which is not a thing. But he basically, in his mind, anyone with his amount of SERE training or more, so if you had been through refresher training at least 5 times, which was conveniently how many times he had been through, wouldn't have to go through a field portion of training, because he didn't want to go through the field. So I don't know, a week later, I bumped into the wing commander up at my face, and he told me all about the executive level SERE training that I was going to be implementing, and wasn't going to have anyone go through field training, just do it all in the classroom. And I was like, that's
Not a
not a thing.
thing.
I mean, I don't get to sign that paperwork, so good luck.
Oh, that is hilarious. I've seen that a couple different times for TCCC or some other things. It's like the abridged version, or
Yeah.
executive or leadership, or fill in the blank. That's pretty funny. Not like we all need TCCC. Stephen, I'm curious if someone were trying to find more information on SERE, or they got picked up for it and they were going to start. What's one piece of advice you'd give them? Hey, they're starting out and they're heading out for like training tomorrow or something. What would you say to them?
Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. I mean, just take one step at a time. Don't get oversaturated. You're going to be thrown a lot of things at you at one time. It's done on purpose. We do task saturate our students for a reason. We want them to be able to prioritize certain things in a certain way. But if take a second, take a breath, take a step back, evaluate the situation that you're in, and then press forward with a plan. And if you can talk confidently about why it is that you made certain decisions in a certain order, great. I want to know that. I want to hear that confidence. But if you sit there and you got a bunch of excuses for this or that, or that isn't what I'm not about that. That's not what being a SERE specialist is about.
At least trying to do something, right? Move forward.
Right.
Micah, I'm curious, like we've talked about mental fitness, and I feel like that's a really good note there. Stop, take a deep breath. Did you learn anything specifically from SEER that you kind of use in your personal life to, center yourself, or did you kind of learn some of that stuff later on?
I'd say, never quit when it's hard. If you're gonna start something, get through the end of it. If you decide after you're done you don't want to do it, then that's okay. But if something's hard, like that's not the time to quit. It's going to stop you from doing a lot of things you want to achieve in life just because you got some temporary discomfort. So that was probably something that helped me get through tech school and actually graduate, that I still continue to use today. And then my second thing would probably just be embrace failure and learn from it.
Hmm. So
I
for
like that though. I was sorry not to jump in, but what Micah was saying about things are going to be hard, just acknowledge that. I think it's Huberman, if you're listening to his podcast, I think he goes on something and has a conversation about like, we do hard things now. So when adversity pops up, like we can sit there and we can look at it in the face saying like, well, I've already done all this other hard stuff. This isn't going to be that bad. So you'll get that a lot throughout training. And I think most SEER specialists, when you meet them, they just kind of, you will pick that up about them relatively quick.
That's a good note. I know I've mentioned on the show, but just reemphasize, I think it's super important. We talk about resiliency in the Air Force all the time, and it seems to almost be losing its appeal because it's such a buzzword. But I feel like for some reason it feels like, people want it to come easy, but
Yeah.
that's the opposite of how it works. You have to go
Right.
through something difficult and then look back and realize, oh, I could do that. It sucked for a little bit, but I got through. And so it's kind of confusing where people want things to be easy. Because I think with modern technology, and we can get food in an instant, and Google an answer and find out anything we want, and things come easy. That's kind of where we're at right now. And so it seems like that's where it's at. So I'm glad you guys mentioned that's a really good reemphasis. And I'll say that anytime it comes up, like build the resiliency. Resiliency doesn't just fall upon you; it's built from going through
I,
those difficult situations. I'm
I think
curious,
it's
Mike.
funny.
Oh,
Oh,
go ahead.
sorry. No, I was going to say, I gotta go back to Fairchild next summer or next year. We have to go back every once in a while to reevaluate the program and just kind of see if they've changed anything. It allows us to kind of go back and touch the stone, if you will. Um, but one of the things that I'll be curious about is now especially with this younger generation, and it feels weird to say that, but like they go to the woods and they don't have their cell phone. Like, what does that look like now? Like when I went through the training, like, yeah, my cell phone was there, but it wasn't as important of an object that it is today. I'd be curious to see though, like those 11 or those 7 days out in the woods without any sort of electronic like device or cell phone or any of that connection. What does that look like, and how is that impacting some of our students, and are we addressing that? I don't know.
I'm almost curious on the other side too, because initially I would think of the member, right? But on the flip side, talk about families, right? People are used to being able to get a hold of someone every day. I wonder,
Yeah.
do they become alarmed? Do they start calling you? If they find your phone number, are they going to call the base? That is a good point. I wonder, hopefully they know where they're at, of course, if they're a loved one, but that could be, more things than we think, right? Second and third order effects.
Yeah.
But Micah, I was curious, going through those difficult times, is there a moment that you remember, or did it just kind of build upon, or was it just one night or one day that just really sucked and you were able to push through?
Um, never quit while it's hard was kind of the advice I got before starting. which is, I would say that I got a lot of advice before starting, but that was probably the best piece of advice that helped me get through training. Training, summer class or winter class sucked. Although I will admit winter class is probably harder.
I didn't have to walk as far. I did not.
Yeah.
I'll admit it. Like you guys walk way farther than we ever did.
No. Statistically, the winter class is the class that starts in January, and the summer class is the class that starts in July. Historically, summer classes graduate 2 to 4 times the number of people the winter class does. So it's not that every January you just have a bunch of crappy people signing up. It's a harder class, and I think mentally too, it's harder when you get out there for day one of training, and it's in the single digits, and you're trying to make it is probably. As a SERE specialist, it wasn't fun, but going through training and you're not there yet, it's just that much harder. Anyways, to answer your question, it's just kind of something that builds. But that piece of advice I got, that never quit while it's hard, I think was probably the piece of advice that got me through training. Everyone at some point when they're going through SV81, so the SERE specialist training course or tech school, has a moment where they think like, I'm gonna quit. Why am I doing this? This sucks. It's you're cold, you're wet, your feet hurt, your back hurts, you're carrying a heavy ruck. The phase of training that I was in that was probably closest to quitting was mobile, which is learning how to navigate, and it's carrying a bunch of weight really far up and down a lot of mountains. So that was just kind of one of those that you fall down, can't pick your pack up. You feel like you're failing, you get lost, you don't make a final point, whatever it might be. But that's only, truly a failure if you don't learn from it and if you don't grow from it. Otherwise, it's just a learning moment. And that's kind of, I would say, something that built through the whole time I was there.
Awesome. Stephen, in the military, we use the cutting edge technology, always using the coolest stuff, but being out in the woods, using an axe and whatnot, does that really apply in this career field, or is there some cool like tech that goes along with SERE, or is it all pretty low?
No, it's very rapidly evolving. Accelerate, change, or lose, right? That's kind of the new thing. Over the last 2 years, my shop has actually been heavily involved with a lot of innovation projects, and to the point where we're actually creating software-defined radios and programs and apps, and we're doing a lot of stuff right now that forced myself to learn how to code. So as a SERE guy, like, yeah, you obviously have to be able to survive out in the woods, but I've had to learn a ton about FM frequency, radio frequencies, some of the science behind that. And there's a lot of stuff out there, especially when you start talk. I mean, obviously we can't discuss it on this forum, but there's a lot of technology out there, and isolated persons or personnel recovery. That's a pretty big deal in the eyes of the military. So there's a lot of money and a lot of things that get thrown at it, which again, going back to, opens up certain doors early on in your career. You get to see a lot of cool stuff.
Awesome. That's good stuff. So, Micah, I'm curious to paint the picture. We kind of talked about in garrison and things like that. Can you talk about deployments and what that kind of looks like and how often and things?
Let's go back to, it depends on what shop you're in and where you're deploying to. But I'll talk to my experience and then some of the experience that I would have had I stayed in the CAA unit a little longer. So my experience with deployment was to go help facilitate recovery or develop isopreps and stuff like that if it was needed. So I was kind of a hard charger. I didn't want to sit around IED'd when I was deployed. So I was there for 30 days. And in IED'd, it was mostly checking isopreps, making sure people were good to go out the door. We were going out to different units that were on that base, checking their radio capabilities, making sure they had all the correct programming, that kind of stuff. When I was there, I had 2 personal recovery events declared. So 2 people who were lost and, as actually declared. So I ran both of those. They were both declared when I was in the shop. I worked midnight to 8 a.m. So kind of helped try and get them back and recovered. And then I forward deployed from there, and I went to Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, it was doing the same stuff. I was just a lot more involved with people on the ground. So I bounced around country the whole time I was in Afghanistan. Went and worked with the Germans, went and worked with the Italians, developing their personal recovery capability, that kind of stuff. And then I wrapped up my deployment in Iraq as an air advisor. So I went and worked for 5 weeks with the Iraqi survival school, helping develop their program and getting some continuity there. And then that was it. So I could have
Awesome.
sat around Qatar for the 4 months. I was actually about 5 by the time it was said and done. But that's kind of what I was saying earlier too. Is if you want it and you have a drive to go do it, there's opportunity. But those going to Afghanistan and Iraq are not things I had to do. They were things I chose to do, and I was presented with the opportunity.
It's cool that you've mentioned a couple of times that you're empowered to be able to go and control your fate to a certain extent. Stephen, do you have any tidbits on deployments, or pretty similar? It depends.
I mean, similar. Also, I was deployed within a rescue squadron in Afghanistan. The only difference there was instead of worrying about all the other units that were in the air within the AO, I was more on the end user side where I wanted to make sure that my rescue squadron was ready to go recover those other units. So making sure that their comms, whatever comm system that maybe some of our coalition forces were using, what could we actually pick up on some of that? But just like Micah said, bouncing around between Mazar-e Sharif and Herat and just all over the place. Outside of combat locations, I spent more than a couple years out in the Pacific, where working with some of our coalition partners out there, or just allies in general, the Koreans, the Japanese, the Australians. I did a humanitarian disaster relief mission in Thailand during the Operation Wild Boar. So 13 soccer kids go into a cave. They got stuck there. Myself, I was deployed. We got tasked to go and actually help facilitate the recovery of those kids. So those are definitely good experiences. I loved all of it. But as Micah said, if you want it, there's opportunities out there. You just have to be able to be willing to have a clean nose and be ready to go when the opportunity presents itself.
So, funny story. I'm watching the documentary with my wife. She did not know the event happened or the history behind it. And so she's on the edge of her seat the whole time. And hopefully she does or does not listen to this. I don't know which way I want it to go. But she's like, I wonder what happens. I'm like, we know what happened. It's history. It already occurred. But she thought it was a fictional story. She thought it was made up. So I thought that was pretty hilarious. She was freaking out and just really holding on for those kids. Stephen, since you're still in, the final question is, what do you see the future of SERE? What's going on? What's coming up?
The future of SERE. I mean, that's debated often amongst SERE specialists. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't have I can't read the future. Isolated persons are going to be a thing though. Aspect war and the Air Force it appears. This is Stephen Drake's opinion, not Master Sergeant Drake's opinion. But I think it's in a future fight, we need to have the best aircraft, period and dot. And fiscal restraints up being applied. It makes the most sense to invest in the most lethal aircraft available. That might include the divestment of our human weapon systems currently. I might be wrong. I don't know. But what that tells me as a SERE specialist is my job is only going to get more important. As we look, even like the NGAD, the next generation air dominance aircraft that's being talked about, it's not. I mean, there is a human behind that in that cockpit that's going to be the one that's putting their lives at risk, and so we need to make sure that those individuals are trained to our utmost to be prepared to recover them or for them to return with honor. That's kind of that's the motto for us. So I definitely don't see SERE going anywhere or going away. It's becoming very relevant, and it's kind of flipped on its head. If you look at the last 20 years, we've been involved in a conflict in the Middle East where we've had air dominance, we've had the technological superiority of our adversary. Like it wasn't nothing compares to what we're going to be facing in the future. The personnel recovery has some big challenges ahead of itself. It's being faced with, and so it's going to take some creativity and ingenuity to ensure that pilots in a near peer conflict have the ability to recover or to self-recover or be recovered, and that's going to take SERE guys. And gals.
Awesome.
Sorry.
That's good stuff. I'll try to summarize a little bit today. We found out that SERE is a little bit more than camping. Sounds like if you're a go-getter and you have the autonomy to get after what you want, you can, go and dive and jump and a massive amount of opportunities, and really a lot of it depending from unit to unit. But hopefully you took away some good stuff from the episode today. Please check us out on Facebook, YouTube, and Buzzsprout. Thank you both for coming out, especially Micah, since you're sick.
No problem.
And I thank everyone for listening to AFSCs 1 through 9. Remember, exploring different career fields is an important step in finding the right path for you. Join us next time as we continue to explore different career paths and the opportunities they offer. If you have any questions or want to share your career story, please contact me. We'll see you next time. I love you all. See you.